Hi and welcome to another low effort review. Today I'm going to be comparing two monitors that have recently hit the market. Now the first is the Dell Alienware AW3225QF, which is quite a nice monitor. And the second is the LG 32GS95UE. You can immediately see which has a nicer box. Now both of these are 4K monitors with a 240Hz refresh rate, but to me that's where the similarities end. There are actually some pretty significant differences. There are many videos talking about these monitors, but I didn't really find one that compared these two directly, as well as talked about using them in the context of daytime productivity type of usage. And by productivity I mean just regular mundane office work involving Word, Outlook and the like. Now, before I go into comparing these two monitors, especially in the context of daytime productivity usage, I just want to list out 5 things which I think are clearly superior on the Alienware monitor. And the first is the curve. I never thought I would say this, but I actually prefer the curve on the Alienware compared to the straight screen on the LG. It makes it easier to keep the corners in my field of view. You should try a curved monitor if you haven't already, because you never know, you may actually like it. The second thing I think I prefer about the Alienware is the design. Both have their appeals. The LG looks more understated and wouldn't be out of place in an office, whereas the Alienware has a nice sort of gamer aesthetic. But the thing I prefer about it is this cable management. Due to the ways in which the wires are routed, I think they are less visible from the front. So I think I would prefer the Alienware on that point. And the third is power supply. The Alienware monitor has a built-in power supply, so all you need to connect is just the power cable. For the LG, it comes with a huge power brick that's about the length of the base of the monitor itself, which is very troublesome if you need to cable manage it. I wish the LG also could have an internal power supply, because even if it spoils, the monitor's under warranty, you can just get it replaced. So to me, that's another area in which I think the Alienware is better. Fourth, warranty. So in my region, the LG comes with a 2-year warranty, and it's unclear whether burn-in coverage for the OLED panel is included. On the other hand, the Alienware has a 3-year warranty, and there is burn-in coverage for the warranty as well. So that's a big point. And fifth, I think it comes down to price and value. So in my region, the Alienware retails for about US 1,200, and it's possible to get it for about US 1,000 after asking for discounts. On the other hand, the LG officially retails for about US 1,600, and after some discounts you probably can get it for about US 1,470 equivalent. So basically it's a difference of about US 470, and I don't think it's that worth it unless you really value the LG special 480Hz feature, which I don't. Additionally, I think the unboxing experience on the Alienware is better. The box is nicer. It also comes with a microfiber cloth, and the screen was well protected in the box. Whereas for the LG, it was just placed in a cover, so the screen was actually slightly dirty and needed a bit of cleaning, unlike the pristine Alienware screen. So those are 5 areas in which I think the Alienware is a better pick. Now, let me move into the areas where I think the matter of what you choose will depend on your subjective preferences. Now, the first difference comes in reflectivity. As you already know, the LG comes with a matte finish, while the Alienware has a glossier finish. Now, my study room is somewhat bright with 2 overhead lights, LEDs on the side, and there's light coming in from the outdoors. I've set my background to a black wallpaper for these next shots. In these conditions, you can see that reflections are visible on both monitors, but I would say that those on the Alienware are more defined and clearer, and that would negatively affect your viewing experience. For example, you can see that the buildings in the reflection on the Alienware are clearer than the reflection in the LG. I've angled the shot so that you can see the reflections clearly. However, if I set my background to a colourful background, for example that of my cat here, the differences are not so obvious. When both monitors are at their maximum brightness, and I say they actually do a pretty good job of overpowering the reflections from outside, as long as your monitor is not directly adjacent to the external sunlight. In addition, I don't think the overhead lights really affect your viewing experience that much. So my conclusion on this point is that the overhead lights won't affect your viewing experience. However, when it does come to viewing dark content in bright conditions, I think the matte panel of the LG does a better job. It allows you to better appreciate the inherent contrast advantage of OLED, and there's also the matter of how QD-OLED panels such as the Alienware have a sort of slight purplish tint to them in bright ambient conditions. So for those reasons, I think if you're working in a bright environment and you're viewing dark content, you may prefer the LG. Now, the second difference comes in the area of text rendering. There are two sub-aspects to this point: color fringing and shadowing or the lack of clarity. This is due to differences in the underlying OLED technology. The LG monitor uses a white OLED panel, while the Alienware uses a quantum dot OLED panel. Now, RThings has a great article that explains the differences between these two, but in the context of daytime productivity work, I think there are two key differences. Now, in these next shots, you can see some of the differences. Now, first, on text clarity, in my personal opinion, both look great at the average viewing distance of about 20 to 30 cm from the monitor. So I think there's actually not much issue there in the area of text clarity. However, if you're really looking close up, text on the LG has some self-shadowing that does not exist on the Alienware monitor. So some people are more sensitive to this. For example, my wife, when she saw the Alienware monitor, she immediately saw the color fringing and preferred the text rendering on the LG. On the other hand, when I was looking at text on both monitors, I actually preferred the sharpness of the Alienware monitor when it came to text compared to the LG, which had a sort of slight softer look and maybe a bit of self-shadowing in the text. So I think your preference on this will really depend on your subjective preferences, but if I had to weigh the two, I'd say I actually prefer the text on the LG. This is because the color fringing on the Alienware can be quite obvious, and I'm not sure whether you can get used to it, but I seem to have gotten used to like the self-shadowing and the slight decrease in sharpness on the LG matte panel. I think the third difference, and this one is maybe not so relevant in the context of general productivity usage, but it's when you don't want to be productive and you want to play some games instead, which is the reason why you buy these monitors. When it comes to color brightness or like perceived vibrance of the panel, I think the Alienware has the advantage in this regard. For both monitors, I set them to some recommended settings that I found online, and I think one point that will be better on the Alienware is that after setting it up, you actually have color profiles installed on the system, and that helps you to get slightly more accurate colors. On the LG, there aren't any ICC profiles that come with the monitor or the software from LG, so you have to go find your own ICC profile. I'm using the one uploaded by RThings. If you take a look at this next shot, which is of my cat, you see that the cat does look brighter on the Alienware, and to me it looks more vibrant on the Alienware. Now, similarly in Doom Eternal, I think in my subjective view that the picture on the Alienware actually looks brighter and more appealing, although my wife thinks that actually the picture on the LG looks more appealing. So it could be quite subjective and really depends on your own eyes. Now, and now finally when it comes to this Sony OLED demo of Las Vegas, I think that the highlights on the Alienware actually have more of a pop, and the image looks brighter overall, more impressive in my subjective opinion, which you may very well disagree with. Now, I suspect one reason that why the Alienware is looking brighter is because it supports Dolby Vision, which I have turned on for those shots. To me, the image does look nicer when Dolby Vision is turned on. Specifically, I tried 3 modes and I think Dolby Vision Bright looks the most appealing. Now that said, having briefly discussed how I think the image of the Alienware looks punchier, I also think that both monitors are fantastic and both are good enough, especially for me. During the little time that I have to play games on the LG, I actually think, and I keep thinking to myself, how wonderful the image is. And sometimes I spend less time playing the game and more of just like looking at the static scene and thinking that wow, it looks great. Thank God for OLED technology. So, well, your mileage may differ, but I think both look great to me. If I had to say which one looks more vibrant, I'd probably give it to the Alienware, as I think a lot of people online also do. Now the fourth thing I would mention about these two monitors is the speakers. Now, the fourth thing I would mention is that the LG monitor has some pretty good speakers. I've used them quite a bit for calls through my work laptop, They sound great, very audible. For music from Spotify or YouTube Music, it also sounds great. Even for the quick gaming session where I don't really want to put on headphones, and just like have a easy experience, it also sounds great. So yeah, I think there's something that's actually not to be overlooked because it's so convenient having speakers built into the monitor instead of having to fiddle around with something else. So here are two clips that I've recorded, playing back some royalty-free music. The first is through the LG speakers, where I've set the volume on the LG to 60 because it gets really loud, and the Windows volume is set to 100. The second clip is a comparison from the Alienware where I've connected a Sonos Beam Gen 2 via the eARC port. Having compared the two, in my opinion, the Sonos Beam definitely sounds fuller, as it should, because it's huge compared to the LG speakers. But the LG sounds surprisingly good, especially since it's built into a housing that small. So which monitor will I be keeping? Well, it's a really tough choice. I've already listed above 5 reasons why I think the Alienware is better than the LG. And I would actually have been more inclined to keep the Alienware monitor. I don't value the 480Hz mode of the LG, but I do value the curve, the better cable management, the built-in power supply, the better warranty, and the better value of the Alienware. Now, despite these 5 points, I think I will be keeping the LG for 3 reasons. First, while I like the glossy finish of the Alienware because it makes things look sharper and more vibrant, I think the matte finish is more important for me. To me, it minimizes reflections more effectively, and the key use case for having this matte finish is when I'm viewing dark content in bright environments. In these situations, the matte screen does a very good job of suppressing reflections and making them less visible and less defined. They're still there, but it's much easier to ignore those reflections. For example, during the day when I'm doing some work on the monitor, I like to have the desktop set to a black background just to minimize power consumption. And I love how a word window will just pop out at you when you set it to a white background. I just marvel at the contrast while trying to focus on the work ahead of me. And if you're in a bright environment, then the matte finish does help to minimize reflections more, especially since there's a dark background on the monitor. So I think the matte finish is more suitable for my use case, which does involve doing a lot of work in bright environments and sometimes preferring to view things on a dark background. Now, the second thing that I mentioned is that while I like that the Alienware monitor does have an eARC port which allows me to connect soundbars such as the Beam Gen 2 that I've connected, I also like the convenience of the LG's built-in speakers. To me, they do a perfectly good job and they're actually really good. They make things such as having a quick call a lot easier. Now, third, it comes down to text rendering. There's no perfect solution now if it comes to OLED monitors. We have to choose between the slight color fringing that's visible on fine text in QD-OLED panels or the slight self-shadowing and the attendant decrease in sharpness that affects text on white OLED panels. To me, I can get used to both, but I think the color fringing on the QD-OLED is more visible and slightly detracts from the experience compared to the self-shadowing and the slight decrease in clarity on the white OLED panel. So given these two trade-offs, I think my personal preference is to lean towards the white OLED panel for text-based usage. So for my use case in conclusion, which sadly involves looking at a lot of words on the screen during daytime hours, I do think that the LG is the better choice for me, and that's the reason that I'll be keeping it. Well, that's all for now. Thank you for viewing another low effort video on this channel, and catch you next time. Peace.